Getting everything connected in your live streaming system is actually one of the more complicated parts of making your setup work. If you've ever gotten sucked into the black hole of the internet trying to figure out which converter and which adapter and which standard you're supposed to be mixing and matching and connecting, this video today is for you. Hey, thanks for checking this video out today. If we haven't met before, I'm Spencer from churchvideoschool.com. We exist to help churches grow using video. Today, we're breaking down literally every single converter made by Blackmagic to look at every situation that you might need a converter to help you find the right one for your situation. Before we dive into the actual converters themselves, if you want a shortcut to all the gear that you're gonna need to either stream, record video, or both, make sure you check out the free church video gear guide linked in the description below. And yes, after this video, there is a new page just dedicated for converters, so make sure you check that out. All right, so we're gonna break things down by category so that we don't get overwhelmed and you can skip ahead to the right category for you. So the timestamps are listed here to help you find what you're looking for. First, a couple of disclaimers. One is I'm going off of what is on Blackmagic's website today. There is a link to the manual for every converter below, but that was made literally a year ago. I don't think they've updated it yet because it doesn't totally match the website. So I'm going off of what their website says today, which is what they're currently producing and you can still buy. And secondly, the prices that I'm going to mention are what they're listing on their site. If something gets low in supply, you may see a price change, or depending on how far after this video you watch this, things may have changed as far as availability, new models, old models getting taken off, and of course the price may be going up or down. All right, so the first category are actually the most popular and the simplest ones, which are the micro converters. These are updated as of 2021. They now are the 3G version of the micro converters, but they do the same thing they did before, just more efficiently. The best way to figure out what kind of converter you need is literally to go, I have this on one end and I need this on the other end. And you're gonna be able to more quickly and efficiently find the device that's gonna be able to do that for you. So there are three models of the 3G micro converters. You've got HDMI to SDI and SDI to HDMI first. So those two are very simple. If you need to convert an HDMI signal to SDI, say you have an HDMI camera but an SDI switcher input, that's going to get the job done for you. Or say you need to run more than 40 feet and HDMI just gonna degrade, you wanna convert to SDI for the run, and then put the opposite on the other side, SDI to HDMI, to go into your switcher via HDMI if that's the type of input you need. So simple, SDI to HDMI, HDMI to SDI, these are very, very common, very simple to understand, but there is a newer one and it's the bidirectional HDMI and SDI. So what this lets you do is go both directions from either type of input to either type of output. So there's two reasons you'd want to get this. One is that you want to have something that can work in any situation, no matter what you're converting, whether it's SDI to HDMI or the reverse of that. And if you're not totally sure which one you might need, you can get this, spend a little bit extra money, and then it's going to work. The second reason is if you want to send two signals at the same time going opposite directions. So say that you actually want to send camera control from an A10 mini switcher or from an SDI based switcher to an HDMI camera like the Studio 4K Plus. You're going to want to use the bidirectional to get your video feed into the switcher one way and send that tally, color control, and everything else back the other way. All right, now we're going to go to the next major grouping of converters, which are the mini converters. Micro converters are cheap, simple. Mini converters are a little bit bigger, a little bit more expensive, and they can do a lot more. There are 5 main categories of mini converters. You've got HDMI, SDI, audio, optical, and analog. It's important to note that every single one of the mini converters has SDI somewhere on it, either coming in or going out. Because SDI is the broadcast standard connector for everybody, SDI is the basis of all of these conversions. So you're either gonna take an SDI signal and do something to it, or you're gonna take some other kind of signal and output SDI. So it's important to know that one side of the equation with every single one of the converters we're gonna look at today is SDI. Let's start with the HDMI options. There are two, the HDMI to SDI 6G and the SDI to HDMI 6G. Again, pretty much the exact opposite of each other. Now, the main difference with these converters versus the micro ones we just talked about is that they're 6G capable, which is Ultra HD or 4K. Now you can't do 60 frames of 4K with 6G, but if you're shooting at 30 or 24, this is gonna get the job done for you. If you are using a 4K SDI based camera and you need to convert it to HDMI to go into your switcher, that's what you want to get, the SDI to HDMI version, or the reverse is if you're using an HDMI 4K camera like the Pocket Cinema, for example, and you need to convert it to SDI to get into your production 4K switcher. The other thing that these mini converters can do is actually either embed or de-embed audio from the SDI signal. You may not know this, but SDI can actually carry up to 16 channels of audio in that cable. By default, they carry 2. They carry left and right, but you can actually add more channels in there, and we'll talk about that later more in depth. But if you wanted to add or pull audio out of the SDI signal going into the mini converter, these both have the option to either embed or de-embed to or from the SDI depending on which direction it's going. All right, the next major category is gonna be analog converters. So analog is any video technology that's not digital or SDI based. If you have an old VHS player, an old gaming system, an old broadcast converter or switcher that's pre-HDMI, you're gonna be wanting to use some of these if you're not gonna just up and replace that piece of equipment altogether. So if you have older broadcast equipment that you need to get modern cameras into, you're gonna want the SDI to analog or SDI to analog 4K. Now, if for some reason that you wanna convert an analog old video source into SDI to go into a broadcast system, you'd get the reverse, which is gonna be analog to SDI. Some examples of this is actually gonna be like old Nintendo sets that have a component output, VHS players, or any kind of old HD camera that just didn't have an HDMI output on it, but you want to keep using the camera for now, you can spend the money on this converter to get it converted into SDI to be used in a modern setup. All right, the next major section of converters are audio converters. When it comes to audio converters, there's basically 2 directions. You're either gonna go audio into SDI or you're gonna take audio out of SDI. Now, of course, there are 1080p 60 and then 4K models. So there are 4 options here. You got SDI to audio and then SDI to audio 4K. And then there's audio to SDI and audio to SDI 4K. So if you want to take the audio from an SDI feed, say your program feed, and you want to pull that into a mixer or into a monitor or into something else so that you can just hear it but split that away from the video signal, you're going to want to go SDI to audio. If you have a 4K video signal, you need the SDI to audio 4K. An example of when you'd want a converter like this is if you wanted to take the program audio from your live stream and run it somewhere in your building. Now, if your program audio is going out of your mixer already into your switcher, you just duplicate it. But let's just say, for example, I want to take the audio from my SDI cable that's got my program feed and pull it out and run it to a room in the church somewhere. You're basically gonna take your program feed SDI, you're gonna run it into the audio to SDI. You're gonna get either 4 channels of analog or 8 channels of digital AES out of there, and you're gonna use those to go wherever you want to. And then you use the SDI pass-through to send that signal on to your encoder or somewhere else. Now, if you're going the other direction and you need to actually add more audio channels into an SDI feed, you're gonna wanna get the opposite converter, the audio to SDI or audio to SDI 4K, depending on the basis of your video broadcast setup. The most common examples of using this type of conversion are if you need to add in your translated audio to your SDI program feed to go online to be broadcast in multiple languages, or if you're a multi-campus setup and you wanna send comms or some other kind of audio signal for worship or preaching or whatnot into, say, a resi system that's doing multicasting to another campus, you can actually bury those into your single SDI program feed using this converter. All right, the next section is the optical fiber converter that Blackmagic makes. Now, they only have one model, the optical fiber 12G, but it is a bi-directional converter. What it does is take an up to 12G SDI signal on one side, and it spits out an optical fiber signal of the same resolution on the other. And then it also does the reverse. It can take an optical fiber signal in and spit out an up to 12G SDI signal on the other side. There's kind of 2 parts to the optical converter. So there's the actual converter body itself, the optical fiber 12G, but It doesn't work unless you put an optical fiber module inside of it, depending on what data rate you need or want to use. There are 3 different options. You've got regular 3G, which is going to be any HD signal. There's 6G, which is any standard 4K signal that's up to 30 frames per second. Or there's 12G, which is 4K up to 60 frames per second. Now with optical fiber, you can go between 6 and 45 kilometers with your signal on just one cable, depending on the resolution that you're sending, which is insane. So you're gonna wanna use something like this if you have a longer than 300-foot run, which is about where SDI kind of loses its signal strength and starts to degrade. So the primary reasons you'd get this kind of converter are twofold. One is if you're rewiring your building and you don't want to pull expensive, especially 12G or 6G SDI cable throughout your whole building, and you want to future-proof in case those become obsolete in 5 years or 8 years or whatever, optical fiber from every industry source I've talked to is very future-proof for video signal. It's also cheaper. So you're going to spend a few more dollars on the conversion end, but you're going to be able to pull a lot cheaper cable to run your video infrastructure in your building. The other reason I would do this is if you're going to want to send your video across your campus to multiple buildings, anything that's just way too far to run SDI, and especially if you have to pull SDI, you can convert it into an optical network if you already have one. All right, finally, we've made it to the SDI section of the converter. So these ones actually have SDI on both input and output. There's 3 main categories and 4 models to choose from. The first are SDI distribution and SDI distribution 4K. These don't technically convert one thing to another at all. What they do is they just take your signal, multiply it, and send it out 8 different ways. So if you've got a program feed that you want to run into an SDI network to lobby TVs, overflow rooms, whatever, you can actually just buy one of these converters, whether it's HD or 4K, put your program feed in one side, and you'll get 8 copies of that going out the other. Now you'll get more flexibility with video hubs and routers like the rack-mounted version Blackmagic makes that allow you to hot swap what's going where and have different inputs and outputs. But if you just want a basic copy of your program feed to go out and just follow your broadcast feed in other parts of the building, this is cheaper and simpler. Now this next option is probably not going to be useful for any of you watching this, but I have to cover it to say we did all of them. It's a sync generator. So if you're in a broadcast or studio setup and you don't have the ability to reclock your inputs going into a switcher, let's say, and you are having a flicker or you're going to have a dropped frame when you cut sources, you're going to want to use one of these generators that basically takes a standard SDI signal in on one side and makes that like the master clock. And then you're going to have all your outputs, I think there's 6, going out basically into your cameras or other video devices, and it's going to make them all operate at the exact same speed and have all their frames in sync. Now, I've yet to encounter a church situation that needed reference inputs or reclocking of any kind like that, but in case you're in a situation like that, or maybe you have a broadcast studio that you're using and you're running into this issue with more traditional broadcast cameras, this is for you. Finally, the up-down cross HD converter. This is an SDI and HDMI do-it-all type of converter because it lets you go SDI to SDI in a different speed or frame rate. It lets you go SDI to HDMI in a different frame rate, and it lets you go HDMI to HDMI and HDMI to SDI in different frame rates and video standards. Now, it is a little bit more expensive. If you don't need to change standards, again, you're going to want to get the bidirectional HDMI SDI. But if you do have to change standards, say you're getting a 60 frame per second signal from your computer, but it needs to get down to 30 to go into your switcher and be seen, you don't want to buy weird software for your Mac, you can use one of these and it's going to do a great job of converting that signal in and out however you tell it to. All right, now this last section is only for those of you who are or are planning on running a 12G infrastructure system. Now I know that the G ratings get a little bit complicated, so I'm gonna try and make this as simple as possible. 3G SDI is gonna be anything up to 1080p 60, so that's gonna be an HD signal. If you wanna send a 4K signal, you're gonna use 6G unless you wanna send something that's at 60 frames per second. So you can't do that with 6G, you've got to double it up to 12G. So if you want to be able to use a 4K 60 frames per second standard, you're gonna need a 12G based system. The lineup that Blackmagic has made to serve 12G infrastructure are the Teranex Mini Converters. Everything in the Teranex Mini lineup is 12G SDI capable, which is the highest level of SDI you can currently buy. Just about every single one of them has audio in or out via XLR, and some even have RCA, which is helpful. All of them cost the exact same, $495. So no matter which model you're looking at, it's the same price, so I guess that makes it simpler. And then lastly, they're about a third of a rack size, so they're a little bit bigger than the other converters we're talking about that you can just put on the floor. They need to be on a desk, or you can put them in a rack mount if you get a shelf to hold them because they're not obviously full size. Because of that, they're controlled with either USB, Ethernet, or the physical switches, so you can actually put them on your system and control them from software that's on the same network. So they have a lot more flexibility and a lot more capability. All right, real quick, we're just gonna run through the Teranex Mini lineup, and I'm gonna highlight the differences since so many things are similar to the Mini converters we already covered. So first, of course, you've got 12G SDI coming in and HDMI going out, or vice versa, and this can actually upconvert an HD signal coming in on HDMI and turn it into a 4K signal on the way out, so that's pretty sweet. You've got the same SDI to analog options. You've got 12G SDI on one end and analog going out, and then you've got analog coming in and 12G SDI going out, obviously with an up conversion from regular SD standards to 4K standards. For audio, you've got the same two options. You've got audio into SDI and audio out of SDI. But they did make a few changes. On the one hand, they limited you to just 2 channels in or 2 channels out, at least analog. If you're using AES, which is digital, you've got twice that many, so you got 4 and 4. On the other hand, though, they added both RCA and XLR connections to the balanced 1/4-inch jacks that they had before. So that gives you a lot more connectivity straight out of the box for different devices, no matter whether it's a computer, an iPod, a mixer, or anything else really. A new one for this setup is the 12G SDI to quad SDI. So I'll explain this real quick. Before, they invented basically the 12G SDI cable that carried all of this signal in just one cable. To get this amount of information, 4K 60p, you had to use 4 3G cables. So they add up to 12G worth of signal, but they're all kind of the same thing. So if you're still using equipment that uses quad link SDI in order to get this, and you want to either take one cable and split it out into 4 HD signals for a video wall, or if you have a quad link camera or quad link switcher that you want to downsize into one 12G cable, there's a converter for either option. The SDI distribution 12G, they can take any signal up to 12G. So if you put in HD or 1080p 60 or 4K 30, it's gonna basically mix and match whatever you put in and spit it out on the other side. Now, the most interesting thing that's added to the Teranex Mini lineup you can't get anywhere else is gonna be video over IP. The IP video 12G converter will actually take an up to 12G SDI signal and convert it to IP. It'll convert it literally to a 1 or 10 gig Ethernet cable that you can just plug in the back like it's a router. This lets you send video over your entire existing internet network just like Dante, and then pull it out on the other side using the same converter, but just running it the other direction. Now, if this confuses you a little bit, because we already talked about the optical fiber conversion, just know that optical fiber is related to internet. It probably is in your building somewhere, but it's not what you actually plug in and connect to using a category cable like Cat 5 or Cat 6. This is essentially a Dante type conversion without the centralized Dante control and reclocking and sync and all of that stuff, but it does the same thing. It sends your video into your local network, and you can buy a second one of these, put it on the other side, and pull video straight out from a category cable back into SDI, which is actually really impressive. Straight out of the box, it works for up to 3G signals, so 1080p 60, but if you want to send 4K and pick it up 4K on the other side, you're gonna have to buy an additional module to go inside to upgrade, and you're gonna need a 10 gig capable switch in order to process that much information. Okay, finally, we're getting to the end of the road. If you're still with me, thank you for tuning in all the way through. You're a champion. The last converters we have are the 12G optical fiber converters from Blackmagic. Now, optical fiber is different than IP connections like we just talked about, but again, it's very, very similar and related, and it does work with some SyncID correlated devices. So if you're running SyncID broadcast cameras, this will work. So the 12G SDI optical fiber converters actually have dual conversions going on. So you're not just getting SDI in and optical fiber out like we saw in the mini converters. These are actually HDMI based. So you're getting HDMI in on one model and both SDI and optical out, or you're going to get SDI or optical in and HDMI out on the other side. Just like the other optical mini converter, you do have to buy an SPF module to go inside that's either 3, 6, or 12G at all different price points, obviously. So you're going to add that in there based on what you want and need, and then you're going to be good to go. And the other change with this versus the mini converter is it does come with 2 either embedding or de-embedding plugs for audio. So you get a lot more connectivity, a lot more options with this versus the mini converter option for optical fiber. Oh man, that was a haul. I have to say that wasn't the most fun video I've ever made, but I hope that this helped you a lot to simplify this really confusing and sometimes frustrating process to understand how to mix and match cameras and switchers and broadcast monitors and all this stuff that just needs a little bit of tweaking in your system to actually work as one unit. So again, check out the description of this video for links to all the products we talked about today to help you find them quickly, or if you want to do more research on your system and setup and find the best gear for your church, the free church video gear guide is there for you. So thanks again for watching this video today, guys. I hope it's been helpful. Please leave a comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.